You got it.
Today, I am Bruce Lee. Today, I will be interviewing an amazing lady. Her name is Diana Inosanto. How are you doing today?
I am doing really good, thank you. A little busy and hectic, as you could probably, as I told you before, but I'm good actually.
Thank you so much. I noticed that you're very good with people. I can just tell from that. Because usually, people don't notice other people. But thank you so much for that. Um, and you're very jolly too.
I am. I am. I think I probably get that from my dad. Actually, he's a pretty good, jolly man. So you know.
Okay. How did you start practicing martial arts?
How did I start practicing martial arts? Well, for me, martial arts is like a second language. It's usually what I tell people. It is for me about heritage. It's about culture, and so really, that's how I came to, practice martial arts. Because my father always said to me that it's important that you know your ancestry. And so for my father, he started me at a very young age, but he introduced martial arts in a very playful way. And so I was very lucky that he made it so enjoyable at the time that I didn't realize that he was really planting the seeds for me becoming, a martial artist, because he made it all about play, and he made it about, learning the joy of my ancestry and my history. And so we always kind of included it, the history lessons and little stories with each lesson, which is kind of untraditional, but it is what was traditional for me.
So basically, you're saying you wasn't forced. So oftentimes, like when I guess kids when they for you, you're more like it's fun to do martial arts, right?
It
Wow.
was. It was. Although sometimes we had a couple of, he would have to battle with me when I wanted to play with my Barbie dolls, and he's like, oh my gosh, and I'm like, Dad, I'm having Barbie doll time. Come on, give me a break. And he'd roll his eyes and, he would wait. And then, of course, we would start again. But, he made it this game. Like, for instance, we could be, I remember we were in this Chinese restaurant, and all of a sudden he would say, what would you do if somebody did this? And he would stick like a butter knife at my side. And so he was trying to teach me how to disarm, but he made it a game. So it was really in these weird environments that normally you wouldn't have a martial arts lesson, yet there was the martial arts lesson right there.
Did you often do like sparring or like any? You said butter, like kind of like what was it? Butter knife? What was
a butter knife, a cutting knife. A dull blade, never a real blade that could cut. But as far as sparring, actually, as a kid, he would have us spar. I mean, of course, it was controlled sparring. You don't want to have kids knock each other out. That wouldn't be good. That would be really bad. But he did teach us light sparring. And what he would do, which I think is very smart, is he would say, okay, so on a scale from 1 to 10, you're going to spar at maybe 2, or you're going to rack it up maybe to a 5 or a 9, because it was a way of helping us gauge to what intensity or what level we would spar at. And he still does that today, even. So,
Did you learn like because back then I used to take the traditional martial arts, Shaolin. They call it the Hun Foot. Would you do like the traditional stance like horse stance or like bow and arrow or dragon stance or the cross stance or cat?
He would have us do certain stances in the beginning, and it's funny, with each passing decade I noticed that my father's style of teaching would shift and change. And I think too he was evolving as a teacher, because he had to kind of figure out what worked. And so in the earlier days, I remember in the 1970s, because I was a kid, and of course I was in the first kids class, and before that he would throw me in with the adults. But at one point he got brave and said, okay, we'll do a kids class here, when he established a school. And so he would do some forms that they did during the time when he was at the Chinatown School in Los Angeles with Uncle Bruce. So, which kind of looked a little bit more traditional, right? But then it evolved, and that's part of what Jeet Kune Do is about. Really, is evolution and finding your own path as an individual. If that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. I really like because I read your husband book. After I did the interview with him, I read the amazing book, um, and it's more flexible, right? It's like kind of
Yeah.
like it's kind of like if you will, like learning a language, right? Multiple languages. It's almost like because oftentimes we're like stuck in like when we're learning like a specific language
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes or like a specific language. I mean, subject that we don't learn other,
Right, other styles, other systems, and really, you have to be able to adapt. You definitely have to be able to adapt. I mean, one analogy my father would use is like basketball. If you look at old photos, how people used to play basketball, they would do the granny shoot, right? And then later on, we started evolving to more of like an overhand and one-handed approach. And look at Michael Jordan and look at LeBron. You have all these different people that have evolved the game. But can you imagine if we were still doing it the way they did it over 100 years ago? Well, it's the same thing with martial arts. You have to adapt to the times. And then you have to consider too where you live, how you can adapt. If you're a man or a woman, if you are able-bodied or if you are disabled, you have to kind of figure out individually, what's works for you. And it goes back to that wonderful saying that Uncle Bruce had, that man, the creating individual, is more important than any established style or system. And that's a very important quote. But I would say that it's part of the heart of what Jeet Kune Do is about.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to, how did it feel to be in the presence of Uncle Bruce? You keep calling him.
How did it feel? Well, at the time, I didn't know that he was famous or that he had a following. I didn't know what Green Hornet was. I just knew that he was a really cool guy, and he was at the house a lot. And Dad and him always, were always together. And to me, they reminded me with my adult eyes like two scientists. Just obsessed to find like the latest, greatest thing. And I can remember as a child, Uncle Bruce was over in they were in my father's library. And so the parameter of my dad's library had all these books, all these photos, all these weapons. But in the middle of the library, there was like a weightlifting set. And then one corner was my father's desk. So Uncle Bruce would be working out doing weights, and then my dad would be taking notes, and they would talk out loud different concepts and different theories. And I was too much of a little girl to remember. I just remembered that they were they were multitasking, definitely. And yet Uncle Bruce was really good about being able to take a break and kid around with me and be the sweet uncle that he was. So I mean, those are the kinds of memories that I have. And yet they would go, once I left the room, they were right back to taking notes and talking about the nuanced levels of their research.
Right. Thank you so much for the the image of the story of the book, because I noticed that in one of his Bruce Lee book, it's like he read 2,000 books. Because I'm into. I remember Ron Balicki, your husband, said you guys are into Tony Robbins, right? I'm into personal development, right? And
I love that.
yeah, I love it too. What do you get into personal development deep or not?
Oh yeah, you know who I love? Have you heard of Jen Sincero? For a badass. I love her. I'm listening to her Audible books. I also have her regular books as well. But her Jen Sincero, I love her because she's so unorthodox in her approach. But she's like an Anthony Robbins, and so she'll use what I call urban language and talk and and yet you feel really enlightened when you're listening to her. But it's done on this level that's very organic. So she's an amazing life coach, just like in the same vein as Anthony Robbins. You know, they all have their different approaches. But yeah, I would recommend her to anybody if anybody's out there listening. You know.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wait, do you know the book called? Well, I'm gonna. I guess I'm gonna try. Do you know a book called Think and Grow Rich?
What's it called again?
Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, or like you never heard of it?
Yes, I have. Think and Grow Rich. Yeah, I have heard of that. In fact, I think that's the same book I'm thinking of. It's sitting on my dresser. My kid bought that for me for Christmas. So he knows I love these kinds of books. You know, I think it's very important for people, any individual, to always feed their mind with the latest, greatest, and even if you may disagree, it doesn't matter. But there's always people that might have insightful things to share. Anything that helps build your body, your mind, body, and spirit, you know, because, you know, these are times where we have so much information coming at us. And I do think it's important to be able to block out everything else and to feed oneself, you know, and to be on a personal path of growth. So I commend you for reading these kinds of books.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Yeah, because I'm trying to figure out a pathway to see, because I know that Bruce Lee is actually a spiritual person too, and he reads like spiritual books. But I'm trying to segue where what type of books he reads and what type of you guys read too, because I think that you guys are living an amazing life, and I think that, I'm sorry. I think that because people, you know, I never known, you know, how to become successful. You know, where people have a different mindset. You know, society and you know, school. Because I'm a special education, right? I would like to impact the special education because I was labeled special ed, right? And
Were
so
you?
yeah, and so they said that I have a learning disability until I found out that if I read these books about, you know, the brain, like
Yeah.
Tony Buzan, I could, like, I think it's ineffective the way that the educational would teach a student how to operate or the brain. And so I would now realize that we are smarter, right? I disagree with the educational system with America.
Right. Well, it's a certain style. It's a certain system, right? But there are many styles and systems. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because my own son I have two sons. I have one with autism, and I have another one that was classified with having ADD. But, you know, I already knew first of all, I come from a family of educators, but I'm also aware, just as a martial arts teacher, that everybody learns differently. We're all wired so uniquely. And so sometimes I could teach one way with one individual and find that maybe with another person, if I took a different approach, they learn differently. So, and that's kind of the way I look at my own boys too, when it came down to their own education, you know. And, you know, I would take in, you know, and absorb what other people may say, but I always took notice when there were maybe different perspectives on learning. And so I don't think either one of them are wrong. It's just, you know, gathering what it works best for you, you know. And yeah, I commend you. That's awesome that you're doing that. And you know, it's funny. I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad.
Yes, I have his book.
Oh, okay.
Matter of fact, because I read so many books and I'm trying to see, I learned how to be able to ask people to get interview because I don't have connection. So at first I start out tweeting to, you know, best-selling authors, CEOs, for how do they set their goals, right?
Right.
And Robert Kiyosaki is one of my, because I have one of his book. I love him, and
he's written like now 23 books. I actually run with a lot of the same people in his circles, so it's been great. And yeah, I like Robert, and his sister too wrote a book, which was interesting because she was a Buddhist nun, right? And but she also wrote her book with Robert's also influence, and I mean, it's incredible, that family. So, but I love Robert Kiyosaki, and he said something very interesting, because I was an okay student, but I love how he noticed a pattern that sometimes that A students end up working for C students, you know, and I have seen that. I mean, I've known a lot of, quote, self-made multimillionaires, and some of them weren't that great at school, right? But they had a different lock on where their path was for whatever reason, a different passion, and then somehow they excelled at that, and some of them created companies and had people that worked for them. And, you know, I love Robert's quadrant, actually, you know, and I really think that's something people need to kind of, if they're open-minded, take a look at it. You know, how do we function when we make money? You know, are we going to continue to be the employee or the self-employed person, or are we going to take a risk and be on the other side of the quadrant, be a business person or be an investor? You know, and there's some truth to it. And I know Richard Branson has his own formula as well. And so it's kind of interesting how people have kind of created their own process, you know, and have been able to identify maybe different roads to success.
Thank you. It sounds like you really relate to me in a way, because, you know, people, you know, the subconscious mind, where if you relate, it's just like you really do understand people. That's the first time I ever like see him in a way, right? Because I would do interviews, and of course I understand people. You know, I let the people that I interview talk about themselves, because people like to talk about themselves, of course. But this interview that I'm doing with you, like, it totally blew my mind, really.
Yeah, that's cool. You know, I'm
That's
just piggybacking on other people that have been gracious to share their knowledge. So, I mean, that's what it is. It's like an echo, you know. It's like a ripple effect, you know. So
I noticed that you really are into business stuff. Are you?
yeah, I am, and I'm constant. I take the same approach like my father, where I feel like I'm a white belt, and I am there to receive the information, and hopefully will come out of it a black belt in business. You know, I constantly am growing, and I've been so fortunate to meet very impressive people that are leaders themselves in their fields. And so I still feel like I'm on my learning curve, and I apply that particularly right now as a businesswoman in the entertainment field. But like I recently, well, not recently, it was in around 2016, you know, I was invited to the White House, and I didn't know this. Apparently, I'm considered a Filipino-American leader. I didn't know this, but I got an invitation. I have a dear friend of mine named Billy Deck, who, if you ever see him, they call him the mayor of Chicago, but he's an incredible entrepreneur. He's on I think it's the Good Morning Show with Hoda and Kathy Gifford, and you know, he has. He's in the restaurant business, but yet he also is an actor, and also he's an activist, and he was on the Asian American Council or Commission for the White House. And so he sent me an invitation, and it was incredible because I was meeting with all kinds of different leaders from all walks of life, some of them Democrats, some of them Republicans, some of them in between. They were just people just trying to make our world a better place. And so I learn, and I think that's how you grow, is by, putting yourself in a position to be with people who are also trying to evolve and grow and learn, So it's important.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. As a martial arts teacher, as a woman for martial arts, because it's very different aspect of from a guy's standpoint. What is your standpoint for martial arts, as if any woman listening for martial arts?
Oh, that's an interesting question. As a martial arts teacher, or as just watching how the role of women in the martial arts world? You mean both of that, or
Both?
Both. Okay. Well, first of all, unfortunately, there's a real deficit of female teachers. There are women fighters, out there, but to be a teacher is very unique, and so there's not There's not a whole lot of them worldwide, although they are there. You know, martial arts still is predominantly, um, male energy. And so I think it's a little different sometimes when when I used to travel, because Ron Balicki and I, my husband, when we first got married back in the mid '90s, and we started venturing out to be a team that taught. I mean, it was very unusual for men to be around female energy and for me to teach them. And sometimes they were great and receptive, and sometimes you could tell people just weren't used to that because maybe culturally they didn't come from a background that, where they saw female teachers. But then the interesting thing is I found the more I returned to different countries, they were bringing back their sisters, their moms, their girlfriends, their wives. And they were saying, please come and see this woman. Because I think there's also a misperception among women that women can't do martial arts. And I think they feel like, well, martial arts must mean I have to get in a ring. And well, no, you don't. Martial arts can be something as quiet and as gentle as doing Tai Chi in the morning in a park. Or it can be as something bold and colorful as being an MMA fighter, right? From a more sports kind of perspective. There's all kinds of, different martial arts that people can partake in, particularly women. So I'm hoping that is the year, I'm hoping that we'll see more of this, more women stepping into, that arena and becoming teachers. But also, as a student, you don't have to be a martial arts teacher. You can utilize martial arts more on a spiritual level and on a philosophical level. And I use it all the time in Hollywood. And I'm very lucky that I had a father that was really good about showing me women warriors through the ages. So my father would give me this broad understanding, and this is a man now, right? He wasn't a man that said, no, girls shouldn't be doing martial arts. He really embraced the idea that it was important as a father and as a man to have his daughter be aware of women warriors. So we would get out old books, because you got to remember, I'm of Generation X. There were not a lot of schools that had girls, so, and there weren't role models for me. There just weren't a lot at all. So he would get, introduce all these women warriors, from Joan of Arc, from Boudica, which is a Celtic woman warrior, from Mulan, to all these warriors like Gabriela Silang in the Philippines, to these African women warriors, and he wanted me to understand that women knew how to step up too when the time came. And the other thing I think that's interesting when you study women warriors, women who did martial arts, women generals, women who were leaders throughout the ages of time, and this is why history to me should be taught with martial arts, in my opinion, is women came from a place of love. And I know that sounds like such a contradiction to say love in conjunction with martial arts, but you had to remember in olden times, before we had the technology that we had, almost every culture, if they were being attacked, if you were going to learn how to fight off an invading force, you did it because out of love for your country, or maybe your love for your community, your village, your family, and your own temple, your one's, or yourself, right? And so love has always been your strongest why in understanding martial arts and why to learn it. And if you were to apply that today, for me, I love my children, I love my husband, and everything I do is in the name of making sure I can provide a good life for them. I also think martial arts mentally has prepared me in Hollywood, because I was raised around, quote, a lot of male energy in the martial arts industry. It doesn't intimidate me to be in a room of all men and say I have no problem being called a producer or a director and leading men to create a wonderful project. Does that make sense? Yeah. So martial arts can play a positive role in many facets of life.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a long time ago, before we get into all the detail that you just explained, it's very beautiful that you give the viewer, whoever is watching this, be able to see a whole bigger picture. I think that's beautiful. for the history, I think most of the time, I think that history, because I'm beginning to love history for what it is, just whether it's my uh, Vietnamese background history, right?
Yeah,
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 yeah. But, I was born in America, so I don't, but,
right.
right. But I think, because I used to hate history or social study because it would, I don't like it, school would push it, so I think that's
Yeah.
the reason. How
Sure. I
did you?
think a lot of people do feel that way, and sometimes it's kind of how it's taught too that can make the difference.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and yeah, it's the same thing. Why I love Robert Kiyosaki is he said the same thing. You can't judge people by based upon their grades, right, or intelligence. And where if you notice if you place a student if they have a D, and if you place a D student in where they are interested, they'll get an A or a B. They'll do good. I
Yeah.
think that yeah. For how did you guys meet with uh, with you and your husband, Ron Baluki?
Oh, well, my father actually. It's funny. I knew of Ron's existence for probably 10 years because, he started with my father, I think when he was 17 years old. Because my father would do seminars all across the United States, Canada, all throughout the world, in Europe, and everywhere, Asia, South America. And he was one of the stopping places he would always teach at was Chicago, and I had talked about potentially being a police officer at one time, and my father wasn't. It's not that he wasn't happy with that choice, but he wanted me to have a different perspective because this was, and you have to remember, this was right after the LA riots, and he really wanted me to make sure that I knew what I was getting myself into. And so he wanted me to talk to Ron Balicki, his student, because, Ron had been a deputy sheriff for Cook County. And so Ron happened to be in California on a visit, and we talked. And by that time, I had shifted gears anyhow in my interest and decided to stick with going to college and finishing up some of my schooling. And then later on, of course, I became a stunt woman, so which is just as dangerous, right? But it was because of Dad that I met my husband of 22 years now.
No, that's so cute. Thank you for
Yeah, right.
that.
2 years.
um, how does it for you? How does it like you're very multifaceted? I'm very like how did how did you become a actor, a producer, and a director? How,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Well, to me, they're almost kind of one and the same. They're just different expressions of creativity. But my dad's sister, Lilia Inosanto, she also used to be known as Lona Nai. That was her stage name for a while in the 1970s. She was an actress. She taught acting, actually. And so she always thought that maybe I should give it a try since I always loved the arts anyhow. And so she always sort of directed me to some of the best teachers in the country. Like at that time in the late 80s, I was very young, but in the late 80s, early 90s, there was Michael Shortliff, who was responsible for discovering Dustin Hoffman, and he had his part in discovering like Bette Midler and Al Pacino. And he was really more affiliated with Broadway out of New York, and he would come once in a while during breaks to California, to the Burbank area. And so I would, I would be in his classes and take courses from him. So that gave me a real strong foundation in acting. And of course, I studied with other acting teachers as well. And but I struggled because as much as I had great training, Hollywood just didn't have a lot of roles for my type. I'm half Asian. I'm half white. I do have some Spanish ancestry as well, but casting directors just didn't know what to do with me. It wasn't like the way we see it now. I'm happy for young people today because, they're much better about diversity in Hollywood. Because I remember the days when I would go out and audition, and maybe there would be some episode where they wanted to have a 5-liner given to one person of color, and they would audition everybody who was African American, Asian, and Hispanic all against each other for this one tiny little role. And yet they weren't addressing the issue that the writers and the producers weren't, writing material that showed something that reflected the mainstream culture, So it was very frustrating for me, because I loved acting, but Hollywood as a business wasn't opening its doors. And then if you're a woman, it was even worse because there were more roles for men than there were for women. And that's not an opinion. I mean, you could look at the numbers and statistics, and it was, it was just